We're here today with Jon Kiper. Very excited to have Jon on the program today. Jon, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you clearly can't get enough because we were talking as we were getting ready to record. Anybody who runs for office, you get big props from me. My family, we've been through it. It's hard work, win, lose, whatever. But when somebody runs for something like governor after they've been through it, so you totally know what you're getting yourself into, and then you do it again, that's amazing. Some folks would be like, are we crazy for doing this stuff? But big props. And so let's start with that. Tell folks, we'll get into you and all that in a minute, but you ran last year. Tell folks about that and the thought process that goes from kind of an out of nowhere pleasant surprise, 9 to 10% in the primary against some very well-funded opponents last time. And then now running this time with a little curve thrown to it.
Yeah.
Talk about the experience of 24 and how that influenced your decision to run and the way you are running this time around.
Sure. So I got into the race in 2023 basically because I looked at the candidates at Joyce Craig and Cindy Warmington. I thought both of these people have got some serious flaws in their candidacy that it does not seem like they're addressing. With Cindy, it was the Purdue Pharma lobbyist, work that she'd done that seemed to be dogging her campaign, and which I had not seen her give a really reasonable defense of, and which I thought there was one. There was a very reasonable way to deal with that, and she wasn't doing that. And same with Joyce Craig. It was just, it was the same issue. If you couldn't make significant inroads in homelessness in Manchester, how are you going to fix the housing crisis in New Hampshire? And again, and I got into it, in a strange way, sort of thinking like I can help these people be better candidates by getting them to focus on the issues that I think will get the independent voters out. And that's just straight economic stuff, and the thing about it, the independent voters that I think a lot of people don't realize is if they were really paying attention all of the time, they would probably be a Democrat or a Republican. A lot of them just are younger. They're working class, so they're working a lot. They might not have time to spend reading the news or watching the news. They're working 60 hours. They're probably spending their time off watching a show. They don't want to watch it. Like that's too much. Their lives are difficult and complicated. So you have to get to them where they're at, as opposed to thinking that they're going to come and find you. So you've got to go to social media, which is what we did, TikTok and Instagram and all that stuff. But also bring very approachable, taglines. Like Trump was so good with this, build a wall, make America great again. It clicks, And so I had this phrase, we're going to legalize cannabis and we're going to use the proceeds to build affordable housing, weed for housing. And I'd have people come up to me on the streets, the people that were not like your average Democrat, not like a dude riding a bike with his kid goes, hey man, weed for housing, let's do it. And so I got into it. Initially the first reason I actually even contemplated it at all was I was at one point I was frustrated. I was like, I can't afford to run for state rep because I just cannot go to Concord, 3 days a week for 6 months for no money. So I was looking at Senate and I was like, again, Senate doesn't get paid. And I'm going down the line. I'm like, executive council, 16,000, but that sounds like a really annoying job to have, to be honest. And I'm looking at governor and I'm like, well, it's only $150 to get on the ballot, And I'm like, why don't I just get on the ballot? I'll see if my ideas have legs. And if not, it's only $150, So that's kind of the motivating factor, whereas I thought, we live in a democracy. The working class, young people are not being heard. I can get in there. And because of the, owning a restaurant, I have this flexibility where I can go down in my restaurant and I can prep like early in the mornings. I can prep late at night. And that's kind of like my main role in the restaurant is like, I do a lot of the background cooking to make sure the recipes are good. So I can flex my schedule and I can say, hey, someone worked for me Tuesday night. I got this event in Hillsborough or whatever. So that kind of gave me some flexibility. I was like, I can't do this indefinitely because I'm definitely taking a pay cut, but I can do it for the next, 9 months, 12 months. And that was really, it was really an experiment. It was like, let's see what happens. Maybe I do this and I get 1% and I just float off into the, into the, ride off into the sunset and say, goodbye, New Hampshire. Like, I did what I could for you, but you didn't care. So that was kind of really where it was at, was looking at the candidates and saying, and I was just frustrated because I thought, how could the Democrats, after 8 years of Sununu and Republican, leadership, not have a candidate that was going to appeal to people like me? And then the other big one was when I went on Cindy and Joyce's websites, I saw no mention of housing at all. And I was like, this is insane. Like, this is the biggest issue in our state. It's the biggest. It's why I'm, contemplating moving out of New Hampshire, because my property taxes are so high. I can't find a house. Me and my girlfriend want to have more kids. We live in a, 2-bedroom, and to have the two Democrats, not only have these serious issues in their candidacy, but also be not focusing on the only issue in my mind that matters to middle-class, working-class people was just like, I was like, there's no way I'm going to just sit back and let the Democrats lose this.
So you're in the race. You had held local office, right? You had been a Newmarket selectman.
Yeah.
But obviously it's a different kettle of fish, right? I mean, obviously it's a whole nother ballgame now.
Yeah.
So how long after you got in, was there a moment that you look back now, especially now, and you kind of go, I've got my sea legs under me. I'm getting some support, at least I'm getting people to take what I'm saying seriously at events. You can kind of feel you've gone to a little bit better level and things are changing a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what was crucial was that I had met Andy Sylvie. I don't know if you know him. He writes for the Inkling.
Yep.
Used to be, I don't know if he still does it, but was always tweeting from the State House, pretty much the one guy covering politics in New Hampshire from a ground level, I thought, really well anyway. And he was a regular at my restaurant. And I reached out to him and was like, hey, I'm thinking about running for governor. And then he said, hey, talk to my friend Amanda Bolden, who was a state rep at the time. She worked for Run for Something.
Yep.
And so me and Amanda met up, and it was funny because she says, you should just run for state rep and I'll help you run for state rep. And I'm like, look, I can't afford to. And this is part of the reason I want to run, is to get people to think about who is in our state house and how the decisions are being made and what type of people are able to run. And it took a while for me to get her to come around. And then she sort of did. And she was like, look, I want to run your campaign. And so she was able to get me into the party apparatus. So she got me sort of into the, like, I wouldn't even have known that, like, there was fundraisers happening that I could just call up and be a speaker at, So the first one was around the Super Bowl, because they called it the Super Bowl, SOUP, that Merrimack was doing as a fundraiser. And so it was the first time me and Joyce would be in a room together. And it was the first time I was really speaking in front of any number of people. And I get up there, do my thing, it's going all right. And, didn't really feel like, still felt like an outsider then, but it was really at the Shaheen McIntyre dinner where, I'm up there with, Maggie Hassan, Gene Shaheen, Chris Babbitt, all the heavy hitters, they're all there. And I'm on stage with them and I'm feeling like, wow, like they couldn't keep me up, like they brought me, like, this is great. I'm part of the team in a way, I'm at least I'm able to hear and speak. And it was funny because after I got up and got off stage, a guy came up to me and he said, you're the only one that actually was talking about like a strategy to win. Because I'm talking about winning independence, winning young people, and like just strategy. And everyone else there just was like, Republicans bad. There was not even really any policy, idealistic sort of talk about, hey, we're going to expand healthcare, or we're going to, fund education, or we're going to lower property taxes, or we're going to do, it was nothing. There was no like action at all. It was just Republicans bad, Trump bad, abortion ban imminent, and this one guy said to me, he says, they keep bringing up the same type of candidates and expecting a different result. And this is madness, and a couple other people just said, they were like, hey man, they basically, it was kind of like it was like saying farewell to a kamikaze pilot, go in there and get, like, this one guy just said, give him hell. You know what I mean? Like, we appreciate what you're doing. You're probably going to lose, but like, go for it.
And I do think, look, if you look at the polling, and we don't get a ton of state polling, infinite national polling. At the state level, UNH, almost every month these days, will do a poll.
Yeah.
And one of the questions they ask is, what is the biggest problem facing the state of New Hampshire? And you can see it, like if you look over the 30 years or so that Andy Smith there has been polling it, you know, sometimes it was ed funding, like when the lawsuits started going in the 90s. And then it was drugs and overdoses in the late 2010s. And it kind of ebbs and flows. And eventually they come down. And today there's three issues that are always at the top. One is at the dominant top. And this is something I think you've been talking about a lot going back to your last run. Number one by a mile is housing. But then, and here's my thing, second and third on the list now, in some order because they're close, are property taxes and the quality of your local school. And I'm like, actually, those three together make up almost 2/3 of all the answers, because after those three, it drops to the floor.
Yeah, abortion is so
those
low.
Three are actually the same answer, right? Those three are basically the same answer, just said three different ways, depending on maybe where you are in the life cycle. If you're an owner or a renter, if you got kids in school or not, you're saying different things, but you're actually saying the same thing. And I call it the Bermuda Triangle of New Hampshire public policy, because I'm watching all these legislators in Concord, often both sides of the aisle, who are, they recognize that you can't deal with one of those three unless you kind of deal with all three of the three. But any one of the three seems like a gargantuan political lift. And so you'll have, let's put a cap on how much we can spend per pupil, and that'll be a way to keep property taxes down. But then it has all these other problems, and nobody wants to do anything about the zoning of housing, because if you own a home, I mean, scarcity is pretty awesome, actually, because my property value is going up. Here we go, 10, 15% a year. It's a warp. And then, of course, it all connects. And I think you mentioned this at the WMUR interview a couple weeks ago. How we fund schools is somewhere in the middle of the triangle, it seems.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've been talking about this a lot because it's an issue it's a little bit complicated, and so it's one of those issues where it's hard to sort of convey this, but just the fact that a planning board for the last 20 or 30 years and a zoning board is not wanted to allow family homes in because it will just drive up their property taxes, and they know this. And so they stop the housing, but what ends up happening is because there's a lack of housing, you got to pay the teachers more because there's not enough housing. So it's like a self-reinforcing cycle. And, the more that the kids in Claremont don't get a good education, the worse they do, the worse that place gets, the more that income inequality just begins to grow. And it was so funny because I was proposing, and I'm still proposing, that we need to get property taxes down, that what we need to do is have the state paying 70%, the town's paying 30%, flipping the formula, right? So the simple question is, and then cap it at that. So say to the towns, look, we're going to have this other source of revenue, but you're going to only be required to pay 30%. If you're in some rich district and you guys want to pony up more money, go for it. But this is going to be the minimum, that you're going to have to put up. And then how do we come up with this other 70%? I have found in my dealings with people in the last couple of years is I've talked to libertarians, Republicans, Democrats who have all told me, look, my income or my property taxes are so high, I'm willing to talk about another tax, be it income tax, sales tax, whatever. So what I had proposed on the campaign trail, and I probably didn't give this enough mic time, if you will, was just that we need to have a statewide discussion and have forums all over the state where anyone can get up on a microphone and say, I think we should have a sales tax, or I think we should have an income tax, or I think we should keep it exactly the way it is, and maybe there's a way that we could increase business taxes and increase, liquor commission, and possibly there's another option. But the point being that we just come to this consensus where 60% of us agree, okay, and maybe it's a 2% income tax on people making over 100,000, and it's a 2% sales tax, whatever combination. I'm not even going to tell you what the best option is. I'm saying let's begin the conversation. And then once we've got 60% of us that agree, we're going to implement it in a way that in 2 years, some towns are going to go, oh, we're a donor town, or, oh, we didn't know that, this was going to be the outcome. because ultimately, if we want more money, somebody has to pay more taxes. And, you can try to get it from outside the state. I mean, one of the things I proposed was, people love this, is an income tax on anyone that moves here after 2025. Not practical at all. But the fact is,
No.
people were okay with that. They're okay with an income tax on someone else,
Oh,
So,
someone else is 100%. Oh, yeah.
yeah. So, and I mean, cannabis, you legalize cannabis, there's some money there. But the point being, like, there's X amount of money we need to run the state of New Hampshire. Right now, it's like, whatever, 8 billion a year. It probably should be more like 10. I'm not saying double the budget. I'm not saying increase the budget by a huge ton, but like, we need enough money to ensure that YDC is properly funded, so that we do not have abuse in the system, so that there's enough of a welfare or a health and human services system that people like Harmony Montgomery aren't lost in the cracks. Because what ends up happening is, we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in this YDC lawsuit, which probably, had we spent $1 million or $2 million in 1998 money, and hired good people to take care of these children that we're taking from their homes, we could have avoided this whole thing. So I think the state is just frequently being penny wise, pound foolish, Republicans and Democrats. And the fact, little things like, if you find a way to house homeless people, you save money on police and EMTs and ER visits. So, like, let's look at the whole picture rather than just saying, which the Republicans have been very good at, all taxes bad. Taxes are, theft, which is not true. Taxes are simply the cost of living in a civilization. And just say, okay, we need this money. Who's got money? Right now, I would say it's the wealthy and the corporations that they run. And how do we get that money from them in a way that is fair enough that they're not going to move, because we don't want to lose the whole tax base. We don't want to scare them away. But at the same time, we have too many people moving here simply because they don't want to pay income tax. And I don't think that those are great necessarily, community building people. Like, we need to support the community, and we need taxes to do it.
I mean, there's so many you touched on some of the contradictions in the policy over time. It is, first of all, it amazes me that any town ever passes a bond, let's say, for an addition to a school or something, because there's only about 20% of the state's households that have a school-age child in it. And the number of school-age kids that we've had in the state has collapsed. From about a little over 200,000 at the beginning of the century, and we're down at about 160,000 25 years later. We're down 20%. And you feel that in a lot of ways. And so I'm amazed, because you need at least a majority, and often you need like a super majority to get a bond passed. And that means that you need 30, sometimes 40% of your town to not have a school-age kid and still vote yes on something that they will not, in a literal sense, directly benefit from.
That's a really good point. And
I mean, we have this dynamic just hanging out over all of it. And then the taxes, what you say about the taxes, the number one thing that increases, I used to audit cities for a living. I was an MPA by training. And then when I was a mayor, I was an auditor. I was still auditing around the country. So your mayor was an auditor, which was kind of a funny, the Q&A was pretty fun. And so I asked this realtor once, here are two houses across the street from each other. This was in Portsmouth at the time. And the homes were identical. I mean, they're literally across the street, and the school district line was the center line of the street. And one of the elementary schools on one side of the street was seen as the best one, although honestly, by outcome, they weren't, but people thought it was the good one. And the other one was seen as the least of the three that we had in town. And I'm like, if somebody bought that house or that house, and they were basically identical homes, clearly in the same neighborhood, you can see it from the other one, what's the difference based on the school district? And the guy's like, if everything's identical, that house is worth 15% more today, because the perception is it's in the better school district. And so you get into the bidding war, where the people that have the money go to the school, like they can afford to go to the quote good school district. And I would argue over time it ghettoizes the school districts that are seen as not so good. Again, sometimes it's not even true, but the perception is. And then the property values change. And it's like the people, if you're making $250,000 or more a year, you may pay really high property taxes and you won't like it, but it's probably still a way better deal than if you had paid an income tax on your $250,000 a year. You're right. You're coming out ahead. So you're cool with the current system.
Yeah, clearly. And they're also the ones that have the money to donate to the candidates, So I think,
I mean, it's the circle.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's one factor that led me to, I mean, amongst many, millions of, there's so many reasons why I ran, but that was one of them too, was, Newmarket in, I think it was early 2000s, the school's fallen apart. Department of Education comes in and says, we're going to condemn your school as asbestos in the ceiling panel. So we're like, all right, we got to build a new school. It took 10 years to get the bond passed. But what happened was at the beginning of that, there was matching money from the state and the feds. So they were going to get half the money. So if we put up 20, they were going to put up another 20. So the people working on it said, all right, we're going to put in 20. The feds are going to, and the state are going to put in 20. So we're going to build this $40 million school. The taxpayers only heard 40 million and they went, no way. So that got voted down and we kept fighting and fighting and fighting. By the time it took 10 years, by the time they get it through, all that state and federal funding was gone. And so we were on the hook for 36 million. And, in that time, construction costs had gone up, property costs had gone up, the cost of all these things. So, and there was no help, so my taxes are just through the roof. And one of the issues with my restaurant is that our town has grown kind of exponentially in the last 15 years. And it's a good thing. But the problem is that we have no money for parking because so much money is going to the school that trying to say, oh, we need to throw a couple $5 million for another parking lot or a parking garage is just, it's not even tenable, And that's where I kind of went down this rabbit hole. I'm like, I am being punished as an entrepreneur. My job is harder. I'm making less profit because of the systemic way that New Hampshire funds its schools, and it's regressive. And, you look at Newcastle's tax rates and some of the houses there, and you're like, man, there's a $3.5 million house paying $6,000 in taxes, and I'm paying $8 for my little, mixed use with 2 bedrooms. And fundamentally, and my dad has been telling me this for years. He's always been quietly grumbling about New Hampshire's regressive tax rates, but I never really had put it together. And I finally made a spreadsheet, and I'm not a statistician, so I didn't really publish it because I wasn't sure if it was 100% accurate, but basically comparing the median house price and the median income for each town in New Hampshire. And it was just really clear that if you made over $100,000, you were more likely to be in the lower half of property taxes. And so it just, it fundamentally is bad for the students. It's bad for entrepreneurs in these towns that are high tax towns. And the thing that really annoyed me about it is, we've got people in Newmarket, because Newmarket's 50% rentals, right? So we've got people here that are, a lot of people, working, they're renters, so they're working class, or generally, they don't necessarily have a big corporate job or whatever. So they're working, a lot of them in the service industry around the Seacoast area. So they're driving to Newington to work at Best Buy, right? Newington doesn't have to pay for their education or their kids' education, yet they have this well-educated, competent person that came through the Newmarket school system, because our schools are underfunded, but actually quite good. Really, we have great teachers. Now we have a decent facility, but they did a rehab. They didn't build from new. But so we have kids that are leaving our town to go work somewhere else, or adults now going to work somewhere else, or they're just leaving the state entirely because there's no housing because of the school funding. So it's like this cycle of just like a race to the bottom. And I think people are beginning to realize something's wrong. Something is fundamentally wrong here.
I think even some of the kind of Free State and Free State gets thrown around. There are plenty of libertarian-minded Republican state legislators who are like third generation New Hampshire. They didn't move here. They ideologically are libertarian. So it's just sort of, I'll call them the kind of libertarian right, which makes up perhaps now a majority of the majority party in the legislature, and they certainly have a ton of say in the final budget and all. And one of the when I saw about 4 months ago, it was Jason Osborne, the majority leader of the House, who is a Free State. He moved here from Ohio as part of the Free State Project. He is hardcore libertarian in his belief system. He's very consistent about that, except for all of a sudden, about 4 months ago, he says, I want to put a cap on how much towns can spend per pupil, an absolute cap that would be adjusted by some measure of CPI or some inflation cost, but it would be a cap. And when he was asked, why would you do that? That seems like the least libertarian idea, is to have the state tell you how much you can spend per pupil in your town on a student. He said, well, look, the problem is you've got this small number of extremists who come and vote at the local election because they have lower turnout than their general. And he implied it's liberal interest groups who come out for the local election, and they vote for all the money. And if somebody doesn't stop them, they're going to basically force us to do something someday, like an income tax, because it's not us at the state level underfunding. It's not our weird funding system. It's none of that. It's these profligate, drunken sailor spending type selectmen and school board members. They're the problem. We're going to have to put a leash. He used the term, we have to put a leash on them. And I'm like, so that to me is, forget the policy even. To me, it was a sign that more and more people across the ideological spectrum appreciate that the way we're doing it is not sustainable. But the problem is they don't know what to do to match their worldview with that fact. And so they're doing weird stuff. Like, you're hearing weirder and weirder stuff to kind of take the what's the word I'm looking for? To take the maladaptation of something, the dysfunction of something, and do another dysfunction on top of it to try to fix the first dysfunction. And that never works, John. It never works.
Yeah. I mean, a good example, and one thing that I think I will point out is, I believe if the state was to take on 70% of the funding for the schools, it would there follow that the state would have more control over the schools. And that's something that a lot of the taxpayers have got to sort of recognize, is you can't have local control, right, and ask the state to pay more, and then also be completely inflexible with how things are working. Like, good example is, so like I said, we redid our school, was it 10 years ago or something? They started construction. Our high school is about 400 kids, plus or minus a few. And Exeter High School, which is literally as the crow flies, like maybe 5 miles from, maybe 5 or 7, maybe 10 miles most from the Newmarket border, is 400 kids short of their maximum capacity, right? And would they not want, and the thing is, like, our kids have to go to Epping to play football, and they have to go to Portsmouth to be on these teams because we don't have a big enough school. And Exeter's got it's more kids, there's more more sports, like I said, there's more offerings, and certainly it would have made more sense. There's even, and it's kind of funny because I was looking at the map the other day, because one of the complaints would be that they'd have to drive around to get there, but there's a dirt road that if it had been paved, it would make it like a 5-minute drive from the edge of Newmarket to this school. But the whole problem is, when we were doing this, when we were forced to build a new school, it was like we were on our own. We're going to Lee, and we're going to Madbury, we're going to Durham and saying, hey, should we join your school? Should you guys join us? But there was no like overarching like state entity or state like informational body saying like, hey, what would make most sense is if, for instance, Newmarket, Stratham, and Greenland formed a regional high school because you guys are all sending your kids elsewhere and you're right nearby. Like, there was no sense of that there was any direction or leadership on the statewide level. And so we're just kind of, and I mean, everyone on a school board is, you got usually teachers and parents, but like, they're not a bunch of like professional, development people or your town select people are generally like, they're just community members. Like, they haven't spent 10 years studying like implementing educational policy or something. So to give these people this task of spending this money and finding the best way to do it, I think was sometimes just really hard. And it seemed like there was just no greater communication. Like, we couldn't talk to Stratham because they're in a different SAU. We couldn't talk to Exeter because it's a different SAU. And it's like, who cares? Like, why does this matter? You're using this stupid bureaucracy to block like just common sense exchange of ideas.
John, so true story. I used to tell this when I was running for governor, like it feels like 20 years ago because I've tried to excise it from my brain, but it was 7 years ago. So I said, I mentioned earlier, I used to audit cities. And so I was a mayor and I was really young. So I would get asked to speak at national conferences of like city managers. So a lot of MPAs become town manager, city manager. And I had public speaking background and elected official, but the MPA and the auditing. So they thought it would be fun. So I go to Vegas. I'm at this conference. I go through the ching ching, the slot machines, and I go into the conference room, and it's, I don't know, 150 kind of professional MPA, not partisan people at all by design. Like these are civil servants. And I give my remarks, a lot of data about best practices in governance and this sort of thing. And at the very beginning, I said, because they were from around the country, I said, so I'm from New Hampshire and, I'm New Hampshire. And then I don't mention New Hampshire again for the rest of my remarks. And then at the end, I go, and I'm glad to take your questions. And so the first question was some dude from not around here. And he says, yeah, did you say you're from New Hampshire? I'm like, yeah, I guess you missed all of the content, but yes, if that's what you retain, then yes, I am from Manchester, New Hampshire. And he goes, okay, that's funny, because what we were told is that when we want to know what American and state style structure of governance looked like in the 19th century, New Hampshire is what it is today. Like, so about 150 years ago, when civil servants became professionalized and it became a discipline to be there were no such thing as town managers 300 years ago. So when this started, there were things they recognized. So like 150 years ago, states started to realize if every town had its own fire department, its own police department, its own elementary school, its own public works, its own everything, a couple of things would eventually happen. You would eventually have incredibly high property taxes. And eventually you'd have diminished services because no matter how much you spent, you couldn't get out of the tailspin of inefficiency that comes from the abject lack of scale. So fast forward. So now I'm auditing cities in like Florida and North Carolina and Georgia and Texas. And I would sit down with employees and they were always nervous because I was like an auditor. So I'd sit down, I'd try to make them comfortable. And I'd be like, hey, I'm Steve. And hey, it's my first time to, Dade City, Florida. So where are you from? And I swear, every time people would never say the city or town they were from. They always said the county, So in Florida, I believe there's 68 counties. There's about 60 counties. I forget the exact number. There are the same number of school districts as there are counties in Florida because there's one per county. We have almost twice as many school districts as the state of Florida.
Wow.
Where Dade County, where Miami is, has more students, K through 12, than New Hampshire. And we have 115 or so school districts, and they have one. Now, maybe they should have two. I'm not arguing, maybe it's too big, but it's certainly don't think they should have 20, much less 115. And so you end up with this amazing administrative cost per pupil, which makes me sound like a Republican out of context, but this is just good MPA 101. Man, like 150 years ago, they're like, there's no way Newington, Newcastle, and Portsmouth would have 5 elementary schools between them, because Newcastle and Newington each have their own elementary school.
Yeah.
And it's costing them like 40 plus grand a kid.
Yeah.
And they have to, as you mentioned, outsource a lot of the extracurriculars or foreign language, because it's hard to offer a third language when you got 12 kids in your grade.
Yeah. Well,
and that's New Hampshire.
The county thing it's kind of funny because one benefit of owning a restaurant is that in my day-to-day, I could easily talk to 50 people, and at some point I was talking to somebody that had just graduated studying, city planning. And I said, are you going to work, in New Hampshire, or what are you going to do? And they're like, no, I'm going to go out west. And they were telling me that as this country was settled, the closer they got out west, they sort of figured out better ways of organizing cities and towns and just did more things on the county level. And I'd never really thought about it. But I think that would be a great way where you could meet sort of the Republicans halfway and say, hey, let's find this other mechanism for funding the schools. And in return, to meet you in terms of the fiscal halfway, we're going to go to the county and start, doing fire and police and schools by county. And also, I think the county is a lot smarter place to handle planning and zoning. Personally, the people on my planning board in Newmarket will hate to hear that, but just for the sense that, the county is still local control. You elect your county commissioner, even though you probably don't know who it is because you're not paying attention because they have no power right now. But I think that would be a much better way for the county to decide, hey, we need more apartments in this area and we need more, starter homes in this area, and approve based on that and have this bigger picture. Because, I mean, one thing I'll tell you right now is, have you ever sat there? I mean, you must have sat through a ZBA meeting, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I was on the ZBA. It was the first attempt I had at like local government. And I was sitting there and it's so boring. And it's so sort of like, minutia. And it's like you're going through the 5 criteria and you're sitting there trying to think about the 5 criteria. And I'm like, there's no way this is going to exist in 20 years. There's no way that people my age are going to inherit this kind of almost like a religion. To me, it's almost like a religion of how we handle zoning and planning and all these things. And it's like our parents and our grandparents were just handed this sort of broken system. They said, okay, thank you. And no one sat and thought like, wait, is this crazy? Like the way that we're doing this, we're using a lot of resources and people, the towns, it's harder and harder to get people to show up and want to be on zoning boards and planning boards, because it is a lot of time, and it sometimes can be it pits you against your neighbor sometimes in a way that's frequently, I don't think it's fair to say to, this guy, Mike, hey, you got to decide whether your buddy Bob is going to get 40 new apartments next door. And is your priority your relationship with Bob, or is it the 40 people that you don't know who haven't moved here yet, who are, living wherever, that are going to live in those apartments? So I think that that's naturally going to have to happen, because I just do not think that millennial and younger generations have the concentration for these very boring ZBA meetings. All apologies to my ZBA fans out there.
Oh, and God bless anybody land use. I mean, I've told folks for years, if you think the most powerful people in your community are the mayor or the chair of your board of selectmen or the chair of the school board, nope, it's who's ever on your land use boards, because they are literally in a position where they are deciding really the trajectory of people's lives. In some cases, is this a house I'm going to be able to continue to live in? Is this going to be a place that I'll be able to expand? Can I have a home office? Do I need to expand so when we have a third kid? I mean, whatever it is, these are life-altering decisions for the individuals, often for the individuals who are approaching this board, where no matter, and obviously there's codes that they're supposed to follow, but within them, to your point, there are shades of interpretation. And, unless, and this goes back to the money, if you have enough money, you can litigate a negative decision in a way that eventually you could probably get some compromise, or at least you can really bring the thunder. The threat of litigation can be, I mean, we're asking volunteers who, as you noted earlier, are generally not experts in the specific areas to make complicated, sophisticated decisions that have the weight of law on them. And it is harder and harder to get people to commit. And you never want to get to a place where, I know as a mayor, I had to nominate people all the time for 25 different boards and commissions. Some of them were once a year meetings to look at dog leash laws, and others were the zoning board of adjustments or the planning board. I mean, these historic district commission, in those big time, when that folder was super thin because you just couldn't get a lot of applicants. It was a pit of your stomach feeling, because the last thing you want to do is select somebody because they simply are available. That's not a good choice.
Well, that's basically our entire legislature, I mean, we had this problem in Newmarket where, actually, this is why I got sort of pulled into running for town council, where we had some people who were finishing up their terms, and there was going to be, I think, 2 vacancies on the town council, and no one had signed up within the filing period. And I had talked with some people that were on the council
Wow.
about maybe running, but I was like, I don't know if I have time. And they were like, hey, can you run? Because there's a couple wackadoodles who are talking about running. And, and I was like, yeah, sure. And I mean, the one thing about town council was like, we got paid. It wasn't a lot, but it was, $400 a quarter or something like that. And that's kind of where,
Yeah.
I think one of the things, along with the county, moving some services to the county level and having more control from the county level, I think, paying the legislature is another important. I mean, I think a couple things. Paying the legislature and in a longer term, having less state reps, I think is important. I think that we have used that as this tradition for years, and they kind of fall back on, well, the biggest legislator in the world, or second, or whatever it is. But is that better for the average person in New Hampshire? Is that better for democracy? I don't think so. I think most people don't know who their state reps are. There's so many of them, they don't have that much power. And the surprising thing is when I went around this state campaigning, people brought that up to me. I'd say, hey, it's hard for, because the first question would be, why are you running for governor? Why aren't you running for Senate and state rep? And I'd say, look, one of the reasons I'm not running is because they don't get paid. I can't afford to leave my job for no money for that amount of time. And it's something we should address. And they would so many people would say, we got too many of them. And I was surprised at how many people really thought that, because it was something I was like, oh, whatever, 400s, it is what it is. But the more I started to learn and started to realize how hard it is for the parties to even really get anything done, trying to sort of herd this many cats, and then to fund all these different races and all these different campaigns. And then it's just, I think the net result is that you end up, I was just looking at some of the stuff that they got through. And, one of the things was like parents can have permission now to get the record of what books their children are getting out from the library. I didn't realize that wasn't something they were allowed to do before, but at the end of the day, how many parents are falling in? Is this like a major concern? How many parents are sitting there going, I don't know what Jimmy's getting from the library. Like, not a huge concern. We had one of our state reps was all gung-ho about fake service dogs getting into restaurants. Oh, we got to stop all these people bringing their fake service dogs. And I'm like, man, on my hierarchy of needs right now, that's pretty low. Housing, homelessness, opioid. Like, I got a lot of concerns. And the ones you guys seem to be addressing are these fringe issues that won't make anyone mad, but you can go to your supporters and say, oh, we got this gun bill passed. What's the gun bill? Oh, it's you can have a gun in your car and the corporation that you work for won't be liable. And it's like, when was that a problem? Who like you're just, it's like they're addressing problems that don't even exist and then going, look at all this work we got done. It's like, it's just madness.
Well, and to your point, I mean, we're looking at within the course of my lifetime, the second year of the 2-year term, they didn't even meet. Or they didn't meet in the same way with, hundreds of bills. And now we're at a point where the off year, the non-budget year, so in this case, the even numbered year, you'll have 1,000+ bills.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a lot, and it is. But when you have 400 state reps, it's only an average of 2.5 bills per person. And that doesn't sound so bad. But times 400, you end up with 1,000 bills. They all get a hearing of some kind, which, on one level, it's grassroots democracy, great. But again, this is way more work than the framers intended it to be. It was not supposed to be. And as the cost and intensity of campaigns down ballot have increased, the last quarter of the 2-year term, which is basically from the end of that second year, like June of, let's say, 2026, until Election Day, you're hardcore in campaign mode now. And especially state Senate and above, you're busy raising money. So that's becoming a legit job to run for the office. So when you put it together, the pay is $100 a year as a tip of the hat for the volunteer work. But it used to be more or less a volunteer gig. And now it has become, for large swaths of the year, not a volunteer job, not if you're trying to take it remotely seriously. Yeah. And that's where we're at now.
Yeah, you're paying a lot of money to just be a part of it. And I mean, I think the one thing that really gets people when I've been going around talking about this is one, the fact that a lot of people don't really think about that the reps only get paid $100. 80% of them are wealthy or retired. And the biggest thing is that we are the only state that does not compensate its reps. And it's not a lot. I mean, Maine is Maine does, I think it's 12,000 the first year and maybe 8 the second or something like that. In Vermont, I think it's about 15,000. Like, we're not talking about people getting, $100,000 to be a state rep.
Right.
Like, I'm not talking about some rich, there's this idea when I bring this up, these Republicans will be like, oh, you just want these, like, to be some fat cat politician. I'm like, look, $10,000 is not like a lot of money, but it is if you're a stay-at-home mom, or if you're, a nurse who works weekends, or a bartender or something. Like, that's, if you're making 40 grand, you get an extra 10. That's a pretty decent pay increase. Not to mention just, when I was on town council during the pandemic, were days when I, were getting yelled at about the masks, vaccines, all that stuff. And I, again, not getting paid a lot of money. I think it was $1,500 for the year, but I spent one of the checks, it was like $400 on a new guitar. Right. And I would like have these terrible sessions, and people are yelling at me for stuff I way out of my control, way out of my hands. And I get home and I'd play my guitar and I'd be like, I'm not going to drop out. I can continue to do this. Like, there's just like, sometimes there's just an emotional, like, in our capitalist society, like, you have to get money for something to just feel like invested in it, and I tell people this anecdote where it's like, my dad will come to my house and he'll help me, he does carpentry. He's a retired nuclear engineer, but he'll help me with little projects around the house. And he has this tendency to use decking screws when he's putting together anything, even if it's like a finished, like something that will be visible in my restaurant. So he'll just grab these decking screws and I'll be thinking to myself, oh, I really wish he would use these other finishing screws, but I'm not paying him. I'll probably fix it up later when he's gone. But that's just the amount of accountability. If someone's not getting paid, there's just only so much you can really ask of them. But when they're getting paid, it's like, they know, and that there's this now contractual obligation. You're getting paid to do a job, and I've heard I've heard one of the senators just literally saying, he's saying someone was yelling at him, like, you work for the people, blah, blah. He's like, I don't even get paid. You know what I mean? Which, like, is a reasonable.
Well, it's such a good point. It's a good point. When I was mayor, I liked when I got my MPA, it was in Syracuse. So Onondaga County is the county there in central New York. And the most important education I got there was actually this internship with Onondaga County. And there was an alum who would take about a dozen current students under his wing and give us actual projects that the county was really working on, but maybe didn't have the bandwidth to dig in. And so you were doing real work. So I get my degree. I audited zoo. The county had a zoo that it used to run, and it was getting subsidized for hundreds of thousands of bucks a year because it turns out, and they couldn't shut it down because it turns out it's really hard to figure out what to do with a polar bear. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, you can't just shut it down. Like, everything must go. It ends up, you're kind of stuck. You got to run it. And so I did this study, dozens of zoos. It got in a zoological journal. Like, it was great. I learned a ton because you could apply it to anything. And so then I'm mayor, and I'm like, I want to do something a little bit like that for the city of Portsmouth. I have all these questions that if I was an auditor, I would love to dig in and try to answer, but they're not going to make the top 5 things. So I wanted to get a couple of MPAers that were like from UNH, because then a lot of times they live there for the summer, so they could just drive the 12 miles and all that. And I'm like, you know what? I didn't get paid. You don't even have to pay them. And my city manager at the time was so wise, because he said, I've been doing this for 30 years in different states. I always pay the interns for exactly the reason you just described, because you don't have to pay them a lot, but you got to pay them enough that they get that it is a job, and that if you don't show up, there's real consequences. When it's free, it's like you think you're saving a couple grand in the summer for each intern by, not paying them $15 an hour while they're doing the work. But I'll tell you what, they're not going to show up the second somebody offers them $15 an hour.
Yeah.
And they just can't take it seriously the same way. The accountability that comes with even modest pay. And I think there is something to that. People take it seriously in the community as a job when there's some level of remuneration involved between the person and the job itself.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I found this with graphic design particularly, because I've got a couple of customers in my restaurant who will do graphic design for t-shirts for me. and they never will let me pay them, right? That, like, and I'll be like, no, I'll pay. And they're like, no. But the problem is, if I don't pay them, I'm on their timeline. You know what I mean? I get
Yes.
it when I get
Yes.
it, and maybe it takes a couple of months. And it's just kind of a basic concept that I think the founders did not intend to be happening now. The way the government to be functioning the way it is, or dysfunctioning the way it is. And I
Yes.
I was looking back at the Constitution, the New Hampshire Constitution, and it's just crazy. You look at, there's this one section where they talk about, where they basically establish the need for education. And they list off all these things in there that the government should be like facilitating, like literature and charity and commerce and trade and markets. And I'm like, this does not seem like the government we have right now that is cherishing education and literature and I think even historical history was in there too. And I'm like, how can they, especially the Republicans that are like, oh, we got to follow the Constitution. We're strict constitutionalists. It's like, all right, really? Have you read that book? Because it really outlines.
Yeah. Are you sure? Yeah.
Especially the part about specifically says you can't fund religious education. I mean, that part blows my mind. And I realized they got around it with, they give it to this nonprofit, whatever. Irrelevant. Do you think the founders who wrote that would look at that system and go, oh yeah, that's okay? Like, it's a joke. It's laughable.
So in the time we got left, a question when your name comes up, we talk about, 2026 politics and all this, and you've noted this. The Democrats do not have a candidate. They don't, frankly, have anybody. And I mean, my finger's pretty good on this. My finger's on the pulse of this stuff. And we don't actually have anybody that's terribly close to running on the Democratic Party, which isn't that unusual yet. Often it's not until the fall. But at the last couple of cycles, by now, there was action going on the Democratic side, certainly. So you're running as an independent this time, and there's some obvious advantages potentially to that compared to running for one of the parties. Yeah. And there's probably some obvious disadvantages structurally about how people think about how they get information, how you get crowds automatically, other people that are already kind of, talk through that a little bit. What do you see as some of the obvious advantages and disadvantages going that route?
Well, it was funny. So when I was going back and forth, and I should be really clear that I align with most of the Democrats in probably almost all issues, about 80%. And frankly, if Ray Buckley was not the chairman, I would be running as a Democrat. But I realized that I had spent a year with them trying to show them, hey, we got to get the independent voters. We got to get the young people. We got to get out of our comfort circle. We got to talk to the other side. And the leadership was not interested in that. But the people running the county and the town meetings and the people on the ground, I think, were interested in that. And it was just this kind of like misalignment between what the leadership wanted and what the rank and file wanted. And I felt like it was almost abusive relationship, and that the rank and file really deserved better from the leadership. And so that was kind of one of the reasons where I was like, I don't want to get stuck with this. They're kind of like losing philosophy. I don't want that to bring me down. And I want to at least go it alone, because I would not have forgiven myself if I ran as a Democrat, lost to another person that, was loved by the establishment, despised by the independents of our state. And so that was part of it. But, and really, like, the one thing that the Democrats have is really basic. It's an infrastructure. They've got town and county meetings happening all over the state. And that's a huge asset. I mean, one of the funny things that happened last time, and this is where I feel like, and maybe you would agree, but running as a person outside of the establishment, you almost might as well be an independent, because there's, I'm going to these meetings and the average age is probably 60 or so. And I'm giving my spiel. And a lot of times it was really funny because I could tell they're like, oh, good job, but we're not going to vote for you. No, we're going to vote for Joyce or Cindy because they've got the money and we're concerned about who's got enough money to beat Kelly Ayotte. And they weren't really looking at it from a bigger picture, viewpoint. And the Democrats, a lot of them have only been hanging out with Democrats to the point that they do not know what the independent voters want or want to hear. And I only have been because I own a restaurant and I have to talk to people of all backgrounds, and I talk politics at work. And I've been very good at listening to Republicans. And most of them, this is hard for some people to hear, but the ones that come into my restaurant anyway are sane people that just want, lower property taxes, affordable housing, education for their kids. And I found that, especially after the primary, I learned that a bunch of my people in my town who I would have thought were Democrats were Republicans and couldn't vote in the primary because they didn't unregister in time. And I even met some. There was one fundraiser. It was a event that was it was bipartisan, so there was Republicans there too, and Chuck was there. Chuck Morris was there, and it was funny because some of the younger Republicans came up to me and they said, "Hey, all the young Republicans are watching your TikToks. We're hoping that you win because we would rather vote for you than Kelly or Chuck because you want to address our issues, which is housing, it's cannabis, it's all this stuff, which is and also at some of the Democrat meetings, I would have these Democrats, I'd give them the housing spiel. Hey, homelessness, inflation, we need younger workforce. And they go, yeah, but we don't want any more houses. And at a certain point, we don't want any more houses in our town. And at a certain point, I said, one of us is in the wrong meeting. If you guys aren't pro-housing and the Republicans aren't really pro-housing, at least not in any material way that I can see, maybe all of us people that want housing should just be on our own because it doesn't seem like it's productive to be here. So I think that, and so like I was saying, so the downside is we've got to create the infrastructure of meetings, town or county meetings where we can reach out to people. I know it's very unlikely that the Democrats are not going to put up a candidate. And part of the reason I went on WMUR and said that was because, because I knew that would get everyone talking. And that's really the main game right now is like getting the attention economy, for better or worse. I mean, Trump is very good at this, get people talking about you, even if it's negative, because then they're talking about you. But it would be almost impossible for, I think, the Democratic leadership to think about this. But I think that if you look at it like this, right? So let's say Tom Sherman is to run. He will almost definitely lose to Kelly Ayotte 55-45, probably exactly the same numbers as last time. Unless, let's say something crazy happens, the economy goes totally, downhill, like that's possible. But if the election was tomorrow, I think that that's what would happen. But I think that if it was a three-way race, what I think would happen is I would probably get maybe 20% at tops, but hopefully it would be 10 from both sides, right? Kelly still wins, but I think I can pull Republicans because I think that there are a lot of them that do not really like her, but just they liked her more than Joyce Craig. And so in a world in which it's just me as an independent and Kelly, I think I would win all the Democrats plus enough of the independents who have told me, a lot of them had said, we don't trust Kelly. We think she's corporate. We think she's part of the, the machine, if you will. But again, we like her more than a Democrat. And a lot of these independents, and I don't know where this comes from, but there is a bunch of independents that are independent and lean Democrat, and they will vote for a Republican governor. But there are not a bunch of independents that lean Republican and will vote for a Democrat. Sorry, did I say that right? No, I said that wrong. I'm going away. Meaning the independent voters.
I think I know where you're going. Yeah, try that again. I think I know what you're saying, but try that
more
again.
Of the independent
This is an important point.
Vote for a Republican governor than will vote for a Democratic governor. But I think that the word independent is not as toxic to them. I mean, I had people literally, as when we were putting stuff out on Facebook at the beginning, we didn't have any party affiliation at all. And I did that intentionally so that people would have to get into it and then figure out what party I was from. And people would be like, oh, I love this. What are you? I was like, oh, a Democrat. They're like, oh, screw you. Like, I don't vote for Democrats. Literally, just I don't vote for Democrats, And I was like, wow, this brand seems almost toxic. And going back to what I said at the beginning of this part, if Ray had stepped down or we got new leadership, right? And we got some fresh young faces running the party, or if I was running the party, for instance, because I ran against him temporarily or for a little while, or if anyone else was doing it, right? If it was Matt Stover or anyone else or you or whoever, then you could go to people and say, hey, Democrats have turned over a new leaf. Like, we're a fresh party. We're not the same stale party that's been losing for 15 years. We want to approach young people. We want to legalize cannabis. We're going to ease back on some of these more controversial issues that are not good for us, like gun restrictions, going around saying you're going to ban AR-15s is bad politics in New Hampshire. You're never going to get it through. It's a net loser of votes, right? And you might want that very badly, and it will also not really make anyone safer. Most gun violence is handguns. You really want to, make it safer, ban handguns, but that's not what you're going for. So and there's a few of these other issues that they have chosen to die on these hills that are just not popular, and so it's gotten to this point where, Kamala Harris was, it was like people were saying, oh, she lost because the progressives have gotten too crazy, but she wasn't even running really a progressive platform, but it's almost like the whole Democratic brand needs a full rebrand with fresh faces, and new people. And at least in New Hampshire, I did not feel like that was an option. And I was like, I have a better chance as an independent winning Republicans and probably, these Democrats that are skeptical of the party itself than I have of winning in a Democratic primary. I got almost no chance in Democratic primary.
Well, it is difficult in a Democratic primary. One of the things I do a lot of public speaking to many of the kind of committees that you were describing earlier that are obviously overwhelmingly Democratic committees, Democratic activists who attend, and one of the most striking findings from the last election cycle nationally is that the lower the level of engagement, people that don't usually vote in state primaries, even people that don't usually vote in the midterm elections, like the one next year, the kind of people who are the more intense you are in voting these days, the more likely you are to be a pretty liberal Democrat. And so the issues that you will prioritize if in that quartile, think of like high engagement Democrat, low engagement Democrat, high engagement Republican, low engagement Republican. So one of the four buckets will be high engagement Democrats. They never miss an election. They love to vote. They probably have a degree. They probably are making above the median income. You ask them, what are the most important issues facing New Hampshire? I've actually done this exercise and it completely matches the national polling. And in some order, they will usually say abortion, LGBTQ, climate, democracy, Trump's a jerk. In some order, those five kind of issues. Now, if I go to high engagement Republican, low engagement Republican, and here's the key, lower engagement Democrat, the other three quarters will say cost of living, cost of housing, cost of heating my home, cost of driving my car, cost of healthcare, cost of, and immigration often. But immigration is also connected with cost because it's perceived with some, you argue the merits, but as a contributing factor to the high cost of housing on the entry level and in certain parts of the country, on the pushing down of wages in certain parts of the country because of competition for more supply and demand. So even those are really cost related policies. So and it makes sense because in that quartile, the high engagement Democrat, if you're making $200,000 a year and eggs were, $8 a dozen, they're lower now. They're more like I pay like $4 now, but let's say they were $8 at one point. They were $8.
Yeah,
$8 a dozen. You grumble, and then you buy the eggs. Yeah. When you make $35,000 a year, $8 a dozen, you get pissed, and then you don't buy the eggs. And that is real at the $35K level in a way that just isn't so real at the $235K. And the same thing with the housing, and the same thing with the healthcare, and the same thing with the heating, and the same thing, education. You try to get your kid to school. It's one thing to be pissed. It's another thing to feel like I'm actually changing my life. I'm compelled to change my life in a negative way because the cost of living is fundamentally inhibiting my choices in life that I can pick from. And for 3/4 of the country, they were saying that's my priority. And they told us in polling, they felt like Democrats running for office too often. They're like, I agree with you on abortion. I agree that we should treat LGBTQ with dignity. I agree that the environment's important. I agree that democracy is worth fighting for. But you guys never talked about how expensive everything is. You're out of touch. I'm not voting for out of touch. And lower engagement voters flocked to Donald Trump and the Republican Party. And there is an opening there for either party or neither party, right? Of a message that says, I am focused like a laser every day, 8 days a week, on how much it costs for you to live your life and what it means to your quality of life when we don't do something about it. I think there's a big road a mile wide on that kind of issue.
Well, and I 100% agree. I mean, I think one of the problems with our national landscape is that, politics is nationalized, where every issue, even, immigration, which I don't think in New Hampshire we have a large, undocumented or legal, immigrant population, like that just is not here. But the fact it's just a matter of what you're prioritizing when you're talking to people. When you talk about housing and affordable housing, hey, guess what? That's good for white people, minorities, LGBTQ, like trans people need housing. Everyone needs housing. And you can talk about these issues in a way that appeals to all of those people, as opposed to what we're doing, what the Democrats are doing, where they're finding, it's this identity politics where they want to boil everyone down into the smallest little bit they can, and then try to prioritize that one person's very specific issue, as opposed to the broader issues that impact everybody, and especially these independent, young, low engagement voters. And I think that's what, it was hard for me to see the Democrats realizing that and changing their approach without changing leadership or messaging or anything. It was like, you guys are going to keep doing the same thing, and I don't want to continue to lose. And so, and I think also, one thing that I think the Democrats should think about is that I think, and everyone in the state, especially people that want change in the Democratic Party, I firmly believe that, and I don't have any evidence to prove this, but I think in 2016, when Maggie Hassan beat Kelly Ayotte, because, and you can't really prove this, but there was an independent and a libertarian candidate in there. And I think after that,
Aaron Day.
Yeah, and the Republicans said, hey, let's not risk this anymore. Let's bring the libertarians in. Let's do the vouchers. Let's do the, we'll get rid of auto inspections. We'll do these kind of libertarian things, throw them some bones so that they don't run against us. We'll pull them into the fold. So I'm kind of thinking the same thing. Is like, if I can present progressive ideas about housing and healthcare and these other issues as an independent, and present them as not a Democrat that's tainted this idea, I think a lot of people want to hear those things, but they don't trust the messenger if it's some rich, pharmacy lobbyist. So I'm hoping that the Democrats will see what I'm doing and go, wow, if we don't adopt some of his platform, we are going to lose people to this other party.
Well, I think one of the things, again, watching you, and for folks, if you go to WMUR.com, actually a self-promotion as well. If you go to stevemarchand.com, that's my Substack. I did a couple of pieces on you, Jon, which it made me so bad. I'm like, we gotta do this. And I hope they were accurate and fair, because I thought you did a strong job.
Yeah, it was great.
You did a very strong job on Adam Sexton's close-up. So if you go on WMUR's website, it's easy to find. If you go and read the stories that I wrote about Jon, if you're listening to this, there'll be links to it as well. And there are lessons that both parties certainly can take about focusing on these economic issues that have massive cross-party, nonpartisan, bipartisan, whatever appeal. And it's this low engagement voter that feels like they're not in the ball game right now. And just a couple days ago, Pew, respected nonpartisan research outfit, they did kind of the definitive study of what non-voters were thinking in 2024. And I think often that's a really interesting thing. What about the people who didn't vote? And one of the things they found, and this is different from the last 20, 30 years of studying this, it used to be the lower engagement people, the people that don't vote as frequently, overwhelmingly were Democrats. And the question Democrats had to really get at is that the old thing was, Democrats have a wider base of potential support, but Republicans have a better base of intense support. So for Democrats, it became about turnout. Can you get people that aren't watching too much, but if they turn out, they'll vote for the Democrat versus the Republicans, who everybody's turning out. It's just their base isn't as wide. It has changed. And so now what we find is among people that did vote last year, but that were infrequent voters, but they happen to show up this time, Trump dominated with them by double digits. But here's the thing, among people that didn't vote, if they had voted, they would have supported Trump by several points as well. So when I hear some Democrats say we had a turnout problem, and if our turnout had just come out, Harris would have won. It turns out if the non-voters had turned out, it actually would have helped Trump, not by like 15 points, but by about 4 or 5 points. And if that's not a flashing red, yellow light for Democrats, my party, we got to get back to basics. And for most Americans, I mean, the vast majority of Americans, the basics are quality of life, affordability of life, the ability to live with dignity, and it's how much stuff costs. And even though inflation is a lot lower than it was 2-3 years ago, I mean, look, you run a restaurant, you have a tremendous number of inputs, plus you're getting the pressure of tremendous competition. Newmarket's got a lot of great restaurants now. It's a delightful downtown. It's a wonderful place to visit. But you got competition everywhere around you, but you got all the pressure of inflation on the inputs, I'm sure, to deliver that meal to somebody's plate. There's a powerful message in there somewhere.
Yeah. And I mean, I would say, 2019 was my best year. I wish I had appreciated what I had then. I mean, just for instance, when I first opened my restaurant 10 years ago, I could buy a box of chicken, 40 pounds. I think it was $28 or $30, right? That same box is about 120 now, 120.
Wow.
And I didn't even know at the time how much that was sort of padding, my profit margin. And I mean, I think a lot of restaurants, I mean, this is like the hardest. And the worst part is, like, we were getting back to normal, and then Trump's like, let's throw some tariffs on everything. And even though, some of the costs haven't gone up, I was afraid avocados and tomatoes would go skyrocketing, which hasn't happened yet. But the insecurity that I'm feeling in the economy right now is, you can see it. My numbers are down. When I talk to customers, they're worried about, they're looking for the lower price items. They don't want to buy alcohol. Like a lot of people are telling me, they're like, hey, I used to eat at your place every week. Now I'm there once a month because, my wife just got laid off. Way more people talking about getting laid off. So I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. So it's people have said to me, they're like, what are you running on this time? And I'm like, well, housing, education, cannabis, still, nothing has really changed. There's a few more housing starts in the state, but we need a lot more to really deal with this problem.
Well, we could go a lot longer. We'll do it again. We'll do it again soon. I think it's fascinating. First of all, I'm a political junkie. I have deep respect that you're running, again, like I said at the outset, that you're running a second time. You really know what you're getting yourself into, and you're doing it again. So you get the big props just on that. And let's give the folks, if they want to learn more, what are the ways they can learn more?
My website is votekiper.org. It's KIP as in Peter, ER.org. Check it out there. You can sign up to volunteer. You can get merch. Shoot me an email. Invite me to your Christmas party or whatever.
And then if they want to have a meal, how about that?
Oh, yes. So my restaurant is Johnny Boston's International. It's at 170 Main Street in Newmarket, New Hampshire.
It's a great downtown. I mean, over the last 20 years, what the town of Newmarket has done, it's funny, between the renovation of the school and then all that investment you guys made many years ago, it's the not sexy stuff, water, wastewater, but it's the sidewalks, the road. You got a lot of great places to visit. I think it's one of the more delightful small towns in New Hampshire, downtowns. It's a great place to visit. So
and a great success story that I love to campaign on. If we could do what Newmarket has done all over the state, we would be in a much better place.
Well, there you go. All right, hey John, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this, and folks, you heard how to connect with John, and we'll do it again soon. All right, thanks, John. And thank you guys for listening to the Steve Marchand podcast. We'll see you all again soon. I'm Steve Marchand. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Steve Marchand Podcast. You can find us, as well as past episodes, on iTunes, Spotify, or on our YouTube channel. Also, you can read my work on my Substack page at stevemarchand.com. Thanks again for listening.